Morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to you all on this latest Lutyens Trust America webinar. Today, we are going to take you to North Carolina in the United States and the County of Devon in the United Kingdom, where two eminent architects, board members of the Lutyens Trust America, will describe and compare two famous houses, each of them designed for a millionaire businessman and intended when they commissioned these buildings as the future seat for the for the dynasties that they intended to should follow on from them. The houses are Biltmore in North Carolina, designed by Richard Morris Hunt and built for George Washington Vanderbilt over 1889 to 1895. The second one is familiar to members in the United Kingdom, which is Castle Drogo at Drew Stainton in the County of Devon. And that was designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens and built for Julius Drew, a successful businessman, between 1910 and 1930. That extraordinarily long period reflects the intervention of World War I, when the workforce was removed from the site and conscripted to work, and some of them to die in the war. Our panelists today are two eminent American-based architects. First of all, Tom Kligerman. He was born and raised on the East Coast of America. He holds a Bachelor of Arts from Columbia University and a Master's in Architecture from the Yale School of Architecture. In 1989, he co-founded the architectural firm of Kligerman Barclay and works out of New York, although he travels extensively for that work and for study and also for recreation. He has a recent book published called As I See It, A Life in Detours, published by Triglyph Books, and this bears witness to his travels and his professional experience. The second panelist is Anthony, also known as Ankie Barnes, co-founder and principal architect of BarnesVanze Architects. He was born in South Africa and retains many connections there. He holds a bachelor's in architecture from Witwatersrand University, and like Tom, a master's in architecture from Yale. He's lived and worked in several countries and settled in the United States in 1981. He revels, well, he tells me that he, and I'm sure does, revels in merging traditional forms of architecture with modern technologies. They are both fans of Edwin Lutyens and directors of the Lutyens Trust America, and we hope you will enjoy their presentation today. But just before we hand over to them, I'd like to ask Robin Prater, who is on your screen, to say a few words before they start. And Robin, over to you.
I just wanted to say a special thank you on behalf of the Lutyens Trust America to all the people from the National Trust that helped to make our recent visit at Castle Drogo so very special. And a particular thank you to Patrick and Bunny Johnston for hosting us at Castle Drogo. They are descendants of the original Lutyens' original clients at Castle Drogo. Our day at the castle was amazing, even on a wet, rainy, Dartmoor day. Also, a special thanks to those at Biltmore House that allowed us to use some of their photographs in this presentation. We appreciate your help with this. Thank you very much. Also, just to remind everybody, this is being recorded. And if you have questions, please put them in the question and answer box and they'll be handled at the end of the program. Thank you very much. Now I'll turn over to Tom and Ankie.
Thanks, Robin. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. We're excited to do this, and we are not historians, but we are enthusiasts, great fans of Lutyens, and homemade historians, if you will. A lot of the images you'll see today are ours, but we have key images from several important sources, as you heard from Robin. So for those of us who admire the work of Sir Edwin Lutyens, Castle Drogo is a well-known favorite. It is famously the last castle built in England, built between 1911 and 1932, perched on its cliff above the River Tyne in Devon, and it's known to us all. Biltmore is an enormous house built in Asheville, North Carolina in America for George Vanderbilt between the years of 1889 to 95, and its statistic is it's the largest house built in America at around 178,000 square feet, or about 16,600 square meters. So it's an extraordinarily large house. And what interested Tom and me about both these houses, and why we thought we'd talk about them together, is they were really quite recently built. They were also beautifully and authentically built and designed by really excellent architects. And they were commissioned by princes of commerce, unlike the titled and landed gentry who normally built such grand homes over the previous 1,000-odd years in England and Europe. And these buildings were also built specifically as a legacy for the families and their names. Tom, I'll hand over to you. Next slide, Rob.
Thanks. Yep, thanks, Ankie. Just everybody is probably familiar with these architects, but we'll just run through them. Next slide. In America was Richard Morris Hunt, who was the architect to the millionaires. They didn't have billionaires quite yet. Trained at the École des Beaux-Arts. And then the namesake for the Lutyens Trust America, Edwin Lutyens, who you see on the right here. Those are our two principal characters. Next. And the clients. The first one is George Washington Vanderbilt, who was the grandson of Cornelius Vanderbilt. And George Washington Vanderbilt is the one who built Biltmore House. Next. The Vanderbilts made their money, or Cornelius made his money initially in ferry service between Staten Island and Manhattan, but he branched out into the whole East Coast, even into Central America. He then moved into railroads, and I think that's where he really made his fortune, which was about $100 million when he died. Next. As Ankie mentioned, both of these clients were interested in establishing their family trees. This is the Vanderbilt family tree. You can see how elaborate it is. And the Vanderbilts, unlike George Washington, unlike the builder of Drogo, had a history of really building big houses. This is the Breakers in Newport, which was designed by Hunt. Marble House, designed by Hunt. So the family had a tradition of really building big houses. Next.
So,
Drew, Ankie, why don't you talk about him?
Right. So Julius Drew is different from the Vanderbilts in that he made the fortune himself and then built the house, whereas George Vanderbilt was a descendant of people who made the money. And he made this money because of the possibilities of the huge British colonial empire. He went to a good school, but he came from a modest background. And at 17, he left school to become a tea buyer at his uncle's firm in China. Moving quickly, by 21, he'd opened his first shop of his own in Liverpool, which went on within 5 years to have a chain of the home and colonial stores that you see here. The number of stores and their success just increased exponentially. And he retired from business at the age of 33, already a wealthy man, bought a large estate, started living the life of a country gentleman. It's worth saying that he was, by all accounts, a nice and generous man, always beautifully dressed. He was an adoring father, kindly employer, and an appreciative husband. And after he settled down, he started thinking about his lineage. Let's go to the next slide, if you will. So these are two family trees. The one on the right, which is clearly Mr. Drew's own family tree. You see his picture right in the middle. But the one on the left is a family tree to which he perhaps aspired and to which a genealogist had actually introduced him. Most importantly, there was a Norman crusader called a Baron Drew, or the Latin-sized version is Drogo, who was the lord of the manor at the nearby Tierton in the 11th century. And then later on, a line of Drews, or with an E added onto their end, starting with Edward Drew, who was the sometime recorder of London under Elizabeth I, who then also, this family started building houses. Let's look at the next one, Robin. So the elder of these Drews, Edward Drew, built this house called Killerton in Exeter, in Devon. And his son, we can go to the next slide, Robin, Sir Thomas, who was knighted by Charles I, built the Grange and moved into it. 15 generations of this family lived here. And then the last of them died out right in the area of Castle Drogo about 10 years before the land was bought by Mr. Drew for Drogo. Tom, why don't you tell us about Biltmore?
Biltmore. Let's look at the next one. Biltmore, as we've said, is a gigantic building. It's hard to grasp the scale of it. from this drawing, but this is the plan by Richard Morris Hunt, who, as I said, was trained in the École des Beaux-Arts. You can see it's a very rectilinear plan. It's very orthogonal. Every room is symmetrical, aligns with the next room in a very symmetrical and orthogonal way, even though overall the building is not literally symmetrical. Go ahead. Next. Here is Hunt's drawing of the entrance elevation of the house. It's hard to call it a house, it's so big. The next one. But it is a house. And then we have a number of photographs of the house under construction, and this is where you begin to see one of the differences between Biltmore and Drogo. You see here, this is a house. It's really about it's a steel frame or a brick structure which has been clad in limestone. So the limestone is added on to the surface of this building. Next one. And you can see here in the beginning of these dormers of the house, the brick inside the backside of that dormer, where the structure, and below that, where the structure is really a brick building with a limestone veneer around it. Completely different from what Lutyens does for Drew later on. Next. Vintage photograph of the house after completion. And then some photographs of the inside of the building right around its completion time. And you can begin to see the scale of things if you look at the size of the furniture in this library, which I think contains something like 65,000 volumes. Next. I mean, the numbers of this house are absolutely staggering. For example, this is the dining room. The ceiling is 70 feet high. This house, when they built it, they built a 3-mile-long railroad spur into the property. They built a kiln on the property to fire bricks. They could fire 32,000 bricks a day. Vanderbilt assembled 700 parcels of land to end up with an estate that was 125,000 acres. There are 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, 65 fireplaces, 3 kitchens. This room is so gigantic that the fireplace at the end couldn't even be 1 hearth. It had to be 3 to make it work. Next one. This is the tapestry room, my favorite room in the building. I have a color photograph of this coming up. Next. And when they were planning the house, Vanderbilt and Hunt traveled around Europe. They visited the Chateau de la Loire. They looked at French buildings. They studied how people had lived. And they went to England. They saw Waddesdon Manor here, built for the banking family in England. Next one. And it really, you can see how that trip influenced Hunt and Vanderbilt in the construction of this one. You walk in both cases across this very flat, almost billiard table-like lawn up to the building. Next one. I mentioned the Chateaux de Loire. This is Blois. And you can see there's that famous helical staircase. And in the next slide, you can see how Hunt essentially lifted that idea and placed it on the house as the staircase for this building. Those balconies you see projecting off had to be carefully engineered because they're attached to the brick structure. They are not really standing up as masonry needs to be, which is stacked stone. So there was a lot of gymnastics they had to do to produce this house, which is really a house where things are added on to. The limestone veneer is added onto the brick and steel frame. The details are added on. You can see how it's a design by accrual and addition. Next one. Here too, the filigrees and everything. This is a building, beautiful building, where the design is really about adding details, adding dormers, finials. Next one. And inside, it's an astounding building to visit. You may get a sense here of the scale of things. This is the main stair inside that Blois tower that goes up. The chandelier alone is vast. I don't know what it weighs. We were talking yesterday about the steel necessary just to hold that chandelier up. It's a 3-tiered steel structure, light that goes up. Next one. This wonderful view from Biltmore looking up the stair. You can see how it goes up that high. You can get a sense of the size of it maybe by the scale of the railing height. Next one. And then the winter garden, which is on the right side as you come in. This is a space with this beautiful fountain in the middle. And to give you a sense of how it was used, in the next picture you see the family entertaining guests around the fountain in that winter garden space. As I mentioned before, it's really a building, and you'll see by comparison to Drogo, where things are added on. There's lots of details and classical motifs in the moldings. Next one, this picture here of the library paneling, the hardware, the furniture, that wonderful step up for the library. You can see its fine detail and the idea that it's almost like something crewel work, or I don't want to say macrame, but it's sort of woven together on top of the sort of surface of the structure of the building. Next. Except for the kitchen. Hunt didn't pay particular attention to this. It's an amazing space to go visit, but unlike Drogo, as you'll see, it's not a place that was really, I don't think, a focus of the architect. Next. Tapestry room I showed you before in black and white is just wonderful. Those paintings on the surface of this fireplace are really beautiful, and the tapestries, which came from Europe, are also spectacular. And right outside of it is the loggia that you step out onto, and you look out next. Notice the Guastavino vaults, actually, if you could go back for 1 second. You probably all know about Guastavino, who was an immigrant who created these vaults. And so many of the buildings built around this time, including Penn Station and others, had that kind of vaulting in them. Next one. Here's the view out over his 175,000 acre landscape. Only 8,000 actually remains in the holdings of the family right now. By the way, I think there are 2,400 employees altogether at Biltmore to run this estate. And next, I just had this slide, and this is the last photograph of Biltmore. I think this is great because two things. One is it shows how, like Drogo, it's built on the side of a hill. In both cases, you enter across this flat plain. But what's particularly interesting for me is that this photograph really begins to show you the scale of the building when you see the people, particularly, Robin, if you could point out the people standing on that loggia we had photographs of a minute ago, you can see that this house is vast in scale, but it's so beautifully proportioned that you don't really understand that until you're either standing there or you look at a photograph of like this where you see the relation between human size and the building itself.
Tom, when we were having discussions, you had a wonderful comment that you could put this in a Xerox machine and scale it down several sizes and it would still be a perfectly proportioned house.
Absolutely. If you walk in and you pace off the rooms and you look at the dining room, you could literally shrink this house by 50% and the rooms would still be more than generous. The ceiling of the dining room would only be 35 feet high. It is designed as though I'm 6'6", so I'm kind of tall. I felt a little bit dwarfed in there. This house could be much smaller. It would be perfectly proportioned and it would still function as a building.
Thanks, Tom. Let's go to Devon and let's talk about Lutyens. So Devon is the southwest of England on the coast, absolutely beautiful. Being down the lower left corner, it's very, very weathery. So you get these beautiful conditions of light. Next one, Robin. These two just give you an idea of the surroundings. It's very hilly because of the moisture. There are trees everywhere. There's a lot of active agriculture. It's just a beautiful part of England. Let's look at Lutyens developing Drogo. So if you are lucky enough to be a member of the Lutyens Trust, and I suggest you all do so, you get to go on a trip like we did. Here are 20 of us last October down on the river, having just looked at Lutyens' turbine that he built for hydroelectric power for Drogo, and we spent a day at Drogo. Here's the group. So I strongly encourage you to get involved in the trust if you like Lutyens, because there's a lot of very interesting access, a mixture of enthusiasts and experts. It's always fun.
Lutyens Trust America.
Let us go to the sketches. So we have a series of early sketches when Lutyens started working on the castle. Now, quick aside about the choice of Lutyens. Lutyens had recently finished work at both Lindisfarne Castle and Lambay in Ireland, and he was the preeminent house architect for the wealthy in England, and so he was a natural choice. He was introduced to Mr. Drew. He went on a family picnic, and they picked a site on top of a bluff, which would be easy to approach from behind, but really wonderful overlooking. And they started in earnest in 1909, 1910. Now, Lutyens wrote to Sir Emily saying what he really wants to build for Mr. Drew was a nice country house. But Mr. Drew had said he was going to spend £50,000, an extraordinary sum, on his castle, and he was quite persuasive. So after a couple of early ideas about houses that were fortified, they started to move to a castle. And this is one of the earliest sketches. You can see there's a knight on a horse, which we all believe to be Lutyens, who's now starting to tackle this challenge. Up on top of the hill is the mass, I think, that would eventually become Castle Drogo, and this would be the notion of a barbican, a classic fortified entry that a medieval castle would have, making it very difficult to actually get into the castle itself. But of course, you have to approach from below and climb all the way up through the stairs and the ramparts, which is not that practical. Let's go to the next sketch. This one is a little later on, and it's clearly the main mass of the castle as Lutyens had it in mind. And interesting to note that it really looks like a big solid block, enormous, with buttresses and bay windows, a sort of additive architecture. You can see some built-in bay windows on both sides, which flank three enormous windows in the middle. And the three enormous windows indicate where the Great Hall was going to be, which would be the great interior destination of the castle. Lutyens is still down below on his horse, but he can't get up there anymore because, in fact, he was going to approach it from another side.
Just to point out one other thing before we do, just for everybody to notice that this sketch is on Lutyens' letterhead, which is something, if you look at his drawings throughout his career, often his sketches are on his letterhead. You see how the pages turn sideways and just grab whatever, sketch off an idea that people can work on.
Right. So later sketches here, which still are pretty much the same building. I think you can see he's starting to look at the light and dark of the punching of the windows and the bays. His roof line is a little more articulated. One thing important to note, very important, is that Julius Drew insisted that the castle have a flat roof and ramparts that could be walked upon very easily, because that's what medieval castles had. He created enormous challenges for Lutyens, not just aesthetic. But you can see the lower left drawing is the south facade with the flanking bay windows and the triple intended for the Great Hall. He's perhaps considering walls down below. On the right, as you can see, I think to his credit, he didn't mess with the landscape below the castle much. It really is very rugged and sort of natural there.
Something, Ankie, if I could jump in again. What's important to notice here is it is a symmetrical building. This south elevation, we'll see in a minute how this changes. But it starts off as a very symmetrical building.
Absolutely. Now this one, a little bit later, thank you, Robin. Another perspective, notice that the buttresses are gone. Now that the main volume of the house is more of a block, he's still figuring out how to articulate the roofscape. In the middle on the right is what looks like perhaps a castle keep, arguably the influence of the Scottish castles and the work of Charles Rennie Mackintosh can be seen, but massive walls. It looks like a big block of limestone from which he's starting to carve his building, which is much more like what he ended up building at the time. So after this sort of sketch, they'd agreed upon the plan, which Tom will talk about in a minute. Lutyens headed off on a ship in late 1910 to South Africa to go and look at the upcoming commissions of the art gallery and the Rad Memorial, War Memorial there. And he spent 2 weeks on the boat on his way there and on the way back with an assistant working on the details of Drogo. The next image, please, Robin. Then when the castle was done, and which we'll look at the castle in great detail, this is actually what was built. And he commissioned these beautiful watercolors by Cyril Arthur Farley, who became a friend of Lutyens, was a preeminent architectural illustrator, visited the site, took the drawings, and then produced these two beautiful watercolors, which Lutyens loved so much he had them in his office until he passed away. And in a sale at Christie's afterwards, the National Trust, to their great credit, bought these, and they now hang in the castle, which you can go and see when you get there. Let's go to the next slide, Robin. But Tom, do you want to talk about the siting?
Sure. So this is a fantastic picture of Castle Drogo on the side of the hill, looking across the field, which has recently been harvested. You really have the sense of, certainly in English, even an Italian castle, looking over the landscape in the distance. And if you look at the next slide, a fantastic photograph that Ankie managed to take from the window of the bus as we were rushing by. You get these glimpses as you approach of the castle sort of looming above you. It's hard to tell the scale of things from this, but you really have the sense that it's up there, and if you're not careful, someone's going to shoot a flaming arrow out of one of those embrasures at you. Next.
Right. Keep those in mind.
That didn't happen, I don't think. But next.
Next, Robin. The plan, so Tom.
Yeah, the plan. This is one of his early plans around the time of that elevation that Ankie showed you, where I interrupted to say it was symmetrical. And the building was essentially symmetrical. The wings that come out that sort of embrace you as you come up were not symmetrical, but they did form a funnel to the front door, if you can point that out, Robin. And you entered right there, and you came into this incredible gallery. You can see how long it is. It stretched across courtyard ahead of you to let some light in. Series of rooms, big staircase, and at the far extreme, at the top of the plan, was that giant hall that never gets built. And keep that in mind because something does get built on it. But this was the original intent of the castle. Next. And here's a very crude model of the massing of the building. This is actually a picture taken, it's in one of the rooms at Drogo. You can see the symmetry, you can see the sort of idea that you come in to this courtyard, big courtyard. And next. But during World War I, in 1917, his eldest son, Adrian, is killed. Adrian was Julius Drew's partner in crime, as it were. Adrian was the one who was also interested in building this building. And once that happens, really the wind goes out of Julius's sails. He is very unhappy. And next slide, he ends up basically putting the development of the building to a halt, partly for lack of manpower, but I think also as a result of a broken heart. Here is what does get built in this model. And next. Here you can see it overlaid on what was intended to be. And the entrance to the building, which is in the middle of the slide, those two sort of octagonal turrets, currently is basically at the center line of what would have been the main hall. And it's interesting how Lutyens picks that location. Partly it gave him a decent sized entrance hall to the building that did get built, but I think also it sort of puts you in the center of what might have been. Next. Just a black and white version of the same thing. You can see, oh wait, go back to that for a second, Robin. At the north end, all the way at the top, excuse me, actually the south end, but at the top of the page, that is the center of what would have been the hall. It is currently a chapel, which we'll show you later, but he does maintain that axis and marks that center point of the building. Next. Put this in just to give you a sense of the difference in scale between Biltmore on the left and Castle Drogo. These are the plans at the same scale. I think you can see from this, if you shrank the Biltmore by 50%, you could still live in it because the rooms are literally, in a lot of cases, easily twice the size as what's in Drogo, and Drogo is not a small building. Next.
So let's talk about the construction of Castle Drogo. You can see the men working on it here. So work started in earnest in 1910. And right at the beginning, there was a dramatic change because Julius Drew saw the foundations being laid out, and he said to Lutyens, the walls are not thick enough. I want this castle to have walls that are, as thick as a man's hand spread. And so that almost immediately doubled the amount of stone and the amount of labor that would have gone into it. The statistics are remarkable. The foundations in concrete are 20 feet wide and 6 feet deep, and the walls of the castle are 10 feet deep at the bottom. And when you get to the top, the walls are still 4 to 6 feet deep as well. The stone for the castle came from a couple of sources. There were local quarries on the 450 odd acres that I believe Mr. Drew had assembled at the time, and the rubble stone that went in the middle of the walls was used there. But because this castle is built for the ages, they sourced nearby the hardest granite to be found in England at two local quarries, Blackenstone and Merivale in Dartmoor. They had about 100 men on site for the first 4 years, and then after August 1914 and the Great War began, everything changed. Almost all the men left for the front, many of them sadly never to return. Work stopped until the end of the war, and then it proceeded after that, just with two lead stonemasons who laid almost all the rest of the stone themselves with their assistants. Robin, let's go on. These two charming pictures. On the right are the three musketeers who really made it happen. Mr. Drew on the left with his stick, who of course had the vision and paid for it. Lutyens, who figured out this incredible design today. And to his right, a really important man, John Walker. He was a Yorkshireman. He was the clerk of the works. He pretty much ran the site for roughly 20 years. He was an expert stonemason and drew full-sized shop drawings of each stone before they went to the quarry and were built. And you can see soon after the house is finished in December 1925, the Drew family are delighted to have a little family portrait on the roof of the castle. Next. So the flat roof has beautiful architectural qualities and really were well worth visiting. Multiple planes, of course. I think everything Julius drew could have hoped for, but of course it brings with it a lot of challenges. Let's go to the next slide. So of course a flat roof is not your first choice when you're building in a rainy climate. And so Lutyens did everything he could to engineer the house to keep it watertight. But even as the family moved in, some of the roofs were leaking. He was working with tar as a fairly new waterproofing material at the time underneath these huge slabs of stone. But sadly, the castle started to decay. So in 2007, the National Trust started an enormous renovation. And the first of my 2 visits there, the house was like this. It was covered by a tent. Let's go to the next one, Robin. So when you got inside, there were sub-tents, and they were basically rebuilding, taking down and rebuilding all of the parapets for the top 6, 10, 12 feet, depending on where the leaks were, removed the entire roof and waterproofed those areas as well. They conducted tests. It was very scientific, very beautifully done, and the work was finished last year. Next, please. This slide you can see before they've attacked this little piece of the roof. You can see the flashing sticking out of it. And you can see the stone is all brown and weathered above it, and fairly dry below it, so that you can see the stone itself, although it's very tough granite, the water finds its way in the joints. It's a cold climate, it's a wet climate, and the building is suffering terribly. Next. One interesting statistic as you look at this is repointing happening, where they scrape out the mortar, which was failing and was soaked, and repointed every one of the joints. A great statistic is that there were more than 40 miles of joints repointed and 916 windows removed, repaired, and put back again. Next one. Tom will now talk about the site and actually bring us to the castle at last.
Right. Just briefly, you enter at that circle. You can see it point out the circle there, Robin.
Sorry.
Yeah, up there on the right that's where you come in. It's a relatively, it's not a very elaborate entrance, but this one sort of forced perspective you see is the one part of the site work that we think Gertrude Jekyll was involved in. She was introduced to the client, didn't do a lot of work on it, but that part you did. You come up the driveway, that's a slope all the way up. You turn to the right, and in the next slide, you go across that road, you'll see in the next photograph, you end up on top of the hill and you come along that angled driveway and you turn into the courtyard. Remember, that would have been a symmetrical courtyard. You turn into it. Next. So this is what you see as you approach. This is what you see now. Next. You get closer and there is the house. You sort of see the side of it before you see anything else, but that was not the original intent. In the next slide, you can see what Lutyens had intended. He intended to build a barbican, which is this big walled entrance with this gateway and the crenellated top and places to shoot arrows from, theoretically. He mocked this up in wood for Drew to see, something that all of my houses, we tend to do that in our office. We mock up every house first before we build them in wood, or I'd like to. Drew said, forget it. Next slide. So you don't have that, but this is the entrance, which remember is turned 90 degrees to your approach as you come into the castle. But to the roof. The first thing we did in the rain, because of course when we arrived it was sunny, we went upstairs, started raining, was to walk around on the roof. That was so important to Drew. Here's a photograph of it. And it really is a wonderful place to be. It's almost like visiting the village of Carcassonne in southern France. It's sort of medieval fantasy. Next, staircases. I want to point out that this granite, which is 2 colors, as Ankie said, every stone is tooled in a slightly different way so that it doesn't feel too perfect. It feels as though it could have been medieval. Here's another view with these clear stories. Lutyens was very concerned about getting light down into the house, so there's a lot of places with their clear story windows. Next. And of course, Lutyens did not want to see leaders and drain pipes all over the house, so he was very careful to hide them. There are a few places where there are scuppers, but for the most part, water is taken off or not in hidden ways. And there's a view out into the Devon landscape.
Tom, perhaps I'll mention the little metal structure hanging over the parapet on the right was in fact built by Basil Drew, who's the second son, as far as I know, he and his own son, Anthony, after him, would hang over the parapet with their tools and actually work on repointing the stone themselves. And when the National Trust director drove in with Basil's grandson, Christopher, and actually saw Anthony Drew up on the parapet, sort of repairing the house himself, I think he realized how seriously the National Trust help was needed to help preserve this wonderful house. Thanks, Tom.
The entrance. Yeah, here's the entrance. This is what you see as you enter. That wonderful bas-relief lion over the front door. And next. Unlike Biltmore, which is a very rectilinear plan, this is a very hard house to figure out from plans. There's 7 floor plans here. How it all knits together is very complicated. You have to have been there and almost study this thing carefully to understand it. So from the next slide, I hope we'll be able to clarify that for you a little bit. As we go through the rooms, we have a little key plan. When you go in, there's this portcullis looming above you as though it's about to stab you as it drops, and you come into the entrance, which you can see in red on the floor plan there, through this wonderful carved oak, English oak door, which is weathered beautifully. Into, this is a drawing of that door from the Lutyens, 3-volume Lutyens monograph from 1950. And here's what it looks like inside. It's stone inside just like it's stone outside, and the doors are, I don't know, 3.5 inches thick, the Gothic detailing on them. Next. Looking off to the left to the family stair, so that's that arch all the way to the left. Windows are set into these arched openings. And then straight ahead of you is the entrance into what was a sitting room, is now a billiard room. And an arch opening on the right, which takes you up to another room we'll look at in a minute. But you can see how everything is stoned, and you can see how around the entrances to these rooms, the stone is cut away. This is a house, unlike Biltmore, where they added things. This is a house where Lutyens is constantly scooping away, is always carving into a giant block of granite. Next. The door into the billiard room, very much like the front door. Vintage photograph of the billiard room. You can see that massive stone arch, the timber above you. We think these photographs were taken shortly after the building was built because there's not a lot of art, although Lutyens liked taking photographs of his buildings when there was not a lot of frou-frou around. He liked them being spare. Next. And this is what it looks like today. There are ropes there because there are people like us wandering through, but it really does feel like a nice library, albeit massive in scale. Stepping outside, we're back in the entrance hall looking at that arch, and you go up steps into the distance. You can see towards the drawing room, which is next. Here's the drawing room. Yeah,
Tom, can I interrupt just to say that leaving the main entry level and walking up to the drawing room is not really perfectly convenient for ladies in heels or people of a certain age. But I think this came about in 1920 when Drew finally decided not to build the Great Hall. And he sent a message through the Clerk of Works to Lutyens saying, I want you to put the dining room below the drawing room, and I want the ceiling height to be the same in both of them. And I no longer want to have food served on the upper level. And so late in the construction of the castle, Lutyens had to rearrange these rooms because the family quarters were above and he didn't have any more height to work with. So you walk up to the drawing room and then you walk down to the dining room, as you will see. And one of the things Lutyens had in mind that suited Drew was that castles are never really built in one go like this. So he wanted both the decoration and the detailing and construction plan layout to show that that castle could really have been built over the ages. So in the drawing room, he uses a softer, sort of more feminine, less visible stone, sort of Georgian interior. Take it away, Tom.
Well, next one. It's the room that feels the least likely like you're in a castle. It's all this green paneling. You have the sense of the castle outside at the windows and maybe the fireplace, which is found in the ground. But next one, basically you're in a room that could be in almost any beautiful house in England, clearly not a castle. The things that make this a castle really are the hallways and things that connect the rooms. Next one. Like this, you go out of the drawing room, you look down this walkway and look at those domes and the plaster and the granite. Next one. And probably the grandest space in the house, the one that gets photographed the most for good reason, is the main stair. This is standing at the top, looking down at the first landing. Next one. Here we are, we walk down to the first landing, we're looking back at that amazing tall case clock up above in that window bay. Look at the coffers above. Again, your stone is all around you. The stairs are wood, but it's a stone building. I think the staircase is about 9 feet wide. Down on the next landing, if you look down, you see below really the grandest space in the house, which is the stair. Straight ahead of you is actually currently a storage room, oddly, and that big window bay on the left side next, letting light in this amazing photograph that Ankie took on his previous visit when it was actually sunny. And you can see how wonderful the light is as it comes through those leaded glass windows. Next.
Tom, if I can just mention,
Sure.
when you walk down the stair, which was clearly added late in the game because the requirements, the dining room was a late added requirement, he built this whole stair around the outside of a granite wall deliberately, as if this was a later addition to the castle. So you're walking down this stair, and there's a family stair that connects the kitchen and dining room level with the family apartments above. Tom, you can talk about the scale of the room.
Well, it is incredible. We lingered a long time here. One of the things that's great is, besides the size of it, is the fact that Lutyens, for proportioning reasons, but also a little bit for forced perspective, makes the windows smaller and smaller as they go up. So you have a sense that this probably 30-foot high ceiling is really 45. It's not the 70 feet of Hunt's dining room, but it is very impressive to stand in there and look at that very simple oak ceiling at the top. Next one. There's another one of that thing, that ceiling. And then this is the outside of the house, where the entrance side is at the top of the picture, and the window bay of the stair is that biggest window bay. Maybe Robin, you can point it out, sort of at the left-hand side of your screen. That's where we're standing. Next. Some details of how it all went together. Again, there's no brick behind this. There's no steel. This is a building that is stacked stone, and there's always this wonderful hardware to open the windows. Sort of early 20th century cranks and stuff. Next. And then you go into the dining room, which is not the first door on your right. That little door there is actually a door to a stair that sits inside a tower, inside the big stair. So there's a stair like an onion inside the bigger one. You can see a window above that lets light into it. And oddly, the most important room down here is not the one straight ahead of you, but you turn right there into it. Next. And Ankie, you want to talk about this room?
Sure. So what's great about the dining room is it's totally different style, sort of an episodic way of building. And you can see the castle walls are much more in evidence here. You can see by the bay window on the left at the end of the table. And then Lutyens deliberately leaves this frieze portion between the wooden crown below the ceiling and above the paintings. He leaves a completely unendowed band of granite. And it looks as if the wooden paneling was stretched like a curtain over a stone room, and you're clearly in a castle. But then to counteract perhaps that castle-y effect, he brings in some of his favorite plasterers and puts this incredible, beautiful decorative ceiling, which gives you something great to look at besides the people next to you while you're having your dinner. There's that frieze in detail, and you can see this is unlike next one, Robin. Unlike some of the other parts, this is where Lutyens actually carves away at wood instead of making it additive like the panels you saw on the front door. He uses Honduran mahogany here, very rich, beautiful detailing, typical of the period. And you can see this is carved away. On the right-hand side is a close-up of the color of the stone. Some of it is just beautiful. The stone and wood juxtaposed. Next.
The family apartments. This is a staircase, very similar. We can go through these one by one, which is sort of a baby version, next one, of the first one. I thought when we walked into it next that this was the famous stair I'd always seen photographed, and I thought, God, it's amazing how the camera distorted the scale of the stair. But in fact, there are two. They're very similar, but where the other one was 9 feet wide, this is probably 4.5 feet wide that you walk up if you actually live in the house. Keep going.
Tom, if I can add just at this moment that after the loss of his elder son, I'm thrilled to say that Mr. Drew's second son, Basil, came home alive from the war, a hero with a military cross, and he stepped up and took a tremendous interest in the project as well. And he was really the first family member to live most of his life in it. And so the family moved into this area, which we're now moving into, the children's wing in 1923, and eventually into the private apartments in 1925. And Basil Drew lived there until he died in 1984, and that's when the National Trust was invited to get involved. Go, Tom.
Well, I was just going to say these are the family hallways, and one of the things this is probably the moment in them that I like the most, where Lutyens had to deal with the thick wall, but he also had to get windows in the hall, and you can see how the stone becomes these thin fins that take you from the wall surface inside the building to the glass at the outside. And again, so he's really carving into these walls, not only to create the window space, but he even carves those moldings into the otherwise flat granite. This is a vintage photograph of the entrance to the night nursery, this wonderful oak door. The day nursery, which is now, I think, part of the family apartments. This hall bathroom, and none of this has changed. Ankie, this is the best dressing room, I think.
Right, the best dressing room where there's a bed now, and off of this is Mr. Drew's bathroom. These, of course, are old vintage photographs, and the National Trust and the family have arranged the house in such a way that the family is still able to, Mr. Drew's descendants, still use the private apartments themselves, and so we are respecting their privacy. Just a few of these old images to look through. The detailing in this part of the house is also, vintage Lutyens. It's fascinating, sometimes amusing. There's little arches between a window-lit space and a hallway behind. If you look on the right, you can see the juxtaposition of oak, pegged oak joinery next to the end of the stone, and they've chiseled a little bead in the edge of the stone as if to say, okay, we're ending the stone wall and we recognize the appearance of the soft. Next.
But if you look at that door, here's just some more details of this one. No, keep going. I'm sorry. Of these how do you open a tiny little window in a wall that's 4 feet thick, and you can see some of the solutions there. But it really, here's some more carving. This is actually above the door of the dining room, probably out of sequence, but you can see how the granite emerges from this flat wall. Next. And it's really, in many ways, an arts and crafts building. These timbered passageways are reminiscent of Marshcourt and probably of Goddard's and some of his earlier houses. This is sort of entwined in this in this castle.
So, Tom, we'll have to move faster. We have to go below the scene. So,
okay.
Just pause. This is a back stair around the areas of the kitchen, and what's wonderful is Robin, you can keep clicking through the granite stairs cantilevered from the walls, and inside it is inserted this beautiful, totally separate handrail system, which is really a tower of wood close to or leaning against the granite. So his use of materials is just brilliant. Keep going, Robin. Down to the kitchen.
And then, one of the most famous rooms, this is the kitchen, which is down below the family apartments. In that wing that you pass as you come in, this is how you enter it. Again, these amazing vaults. Look at imagine figuring out the stonework, how those vaults, conceiving of that piece of stone by itself in a quarry and getting it to fit later on in the house. Some of the details. Unlike Biltmore's kitchen, Lutyens is everywhere evident. Look at that column, which is reminiscent of the cenotaph in some ways, in Whitehall next. The kitchen itself, which has that wonderful circular clear story above it and that round table, which I have to admit we have copied numerous times in our houses next. And there it is above in the photograph that Ankie snatched on the way down the staircase. And some of those details in the kitchen. This is a kitchen that would be great to cook in. On the left is a mortar and pestle. This wonderful table in the middle, and that, look at the hexagonal pattern of wood in that other table on the right side.
So the photo on the right is in a scullery. You can keep going, Robin. The scullery is beautiful in that those sinks, if you look on the left, are actually made of teak. as is the washboard, so that you wouldn't break the glasses while they were being washed. Even the hardware is turned in the most beautiful arts and crafts manner, like small acorns. And then back in the main kitchen, here the sinks are made of metal in the middle and also porcelain more typically. The plate rack is right above you, but all beautifully detailed, practical as all get out, and absolutely beautiful. There's lovely old taps on the drain board, all dating back to the 20s. The back of house details are magnificent. The light switches are hidden behind a little plastered panel. You can see every room had its bell next. The switchboard. So this house was a very modern castle, I should say, in that it had all this technology hidden behind the walls in the most discreet manner, but everything that could make the family comfortable was used. Next. The hardware, Tom, we're going to talk about the hardware a bit.
Well, the hardware is just wonderful. It's either metal or it's wood, but you can see that giant latch on the left in somebody's hand for scale. Fire hose there. Next.
The larders are arranged around this wonderful little octagonal courtyard. Cool breezes can come in and the food could be kept cool in there, but you can see the towers of the house, the castle looming above you. You can see Lutyens goes to enormous lengths to bring natural light and fresh air all the way down to the all-important lower kitchens where everyone is working to make it work. Next.
And then back to Adrian Drew, who was killed in the First World War. They decide to build a chapel in his memory. Next. You get a glimpse that it's there from other parts of the building, but it sits on the footprint of what would have been the Great Hall. And in the next photograph, you can see what that chapel's like. Lutyens is extraordinarily successful in making this space a place of reflection and memory. You go in there, you're automatically silent. It is imbued with the family's sorrow and remembrance of their son. It's amazing how the building speaks to you and how it makes you even talk to one another when you're in it. Next, including little details like this window tucked high up above, which is the one place in the house where a cross is used. Another places uses upside down crosses in those embrasures where you shoot arrows. But here it's a nod to the fact that this is an Episcopalian or an Anglican church in this deep set window.
So if we go back to the exterior, you may remember we talked about this additive block, and let's move on, Robin, to what was actually built. This is one of his most brilliant achievements. This is the south facade of what was built. You can see he starts with a flat plane or block of granite below and slowly starts carving out elements from that flatness, which develop into a bay window all the way to the point where you get to these little slits in the parapet. And if you look at the drawing on the right, it looks fairly unremarkable flat on. You begin to see what's going on in the details. Next slide. You see the carving away, and here's a little note that says no batter on this face in the middle. So he makes it clear that what he's doing is creating 3 dimensions by carving away at this enormous block of solid stone, which is a beautiful development of the original idea and makes it a castle of its time, the last castle built. Next.
Sure. This is the chapel from below. You can see that steeple. We put it in here because if you look at the shape, how it's flat on the sides and it steps flat on the face and steps on the side, it really anticipates next Lutyens' later work, literally a few decades later, his memorial at Thiepval on the left in northern France, or his work on the Liverpool Cathedral, which never got built. The foundations got built, but the rest of it did not. But you can see that flat face stepping on the side next. So hints of what's coming in Castle Drogo.
When you go back to the front facade, looking again like this south facade, you can see the way it's carved away from one plane as well. The one with the sun on the left really makes that clear. And the one on the right shows you how that whole block looks like a castle keep. It really is faceted away from one block. I particularly love below the lion on the left. There's a one little strip that connects the plane as if he spared it from the knife. And that's where the writing is above the entrance as you enter below the Drew lion.
Next.
As you look at this long service facade, which one walks past and one's all excited about the main event and one doesn't pause and look at it, some of this stone planar detailing is evident here. If you look on the left, above the little windows of the tower, there's a projection of perhaps 2 or 3 inches, which continues all the way up to the top of the crenellations. And that is sort of, if everyone that plays chess knows what a rook looks like, and that sort of castellated overhang is very typical, but here Lutyens has reduced it to the bare minimum. And on the right-hand side, it looks as if the stone wall is trying to climb up onto the parapet of the highest piece and never quite made it, as if the boiling oil and the arrows were actually successful in holding back that piece of stone. Thank you.
And just as we conclude, a glass glimpse at the difference between Biltmore and Drogo you see here. This is clearly the opposite way of thinking. Uses this statue, these details attached to the site. And then finally, last slide, just a look back at the two buildings in their site, the flat approach on the side of the hill. I think a nice way to kind of end on how these two buildings look and how they're the same and yet how they're different. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. That was an excellent presentation. We'll take a minute now and ask questions. I also want to thank all of our listeners for listening and encourage you to join the Lutyens Trust America or the Lutyens Trust if you haven't already, and so we can support these webinars. And I turn it over to Marcos with questions.
Greetings from Turin in Italy. It seems like I can't actually see that there are any questions right now, but maybe if anybody wants to write one in the next 4 minutes, maybe I could just shoot one out to Ankie and Tom. So in a kind of nutshell, what would you say are the main differences between the buildings?
American view of life and European view of life. I think, even the fact of my reading off statistics, Americans love statistics. It's the longest, it's the tallest, it's the biggest, and Biltmore invites that in a great way. And Drogo, although it's a massive castle, as we were talking yesterday about it, it still feels like a family house. It's big, it's massive, but when you're in it, the rooms are scaled in a different way. It's scaled for someone to really live in it. Biltmore a little different. Biltmore is really a showpiece. So I think in some ways that may be American versus European way of thinking.
I have 2 things to add, Marcus. I would say, firstly, there are these allusions in Mr. Drew's genealogy to earlier family members to develop a lineage. I would think that those ancestors, whether they really are his or not, would be so thrilled to have these Drews as their family members. Because if you think about what Mr. Drew and his family faced across the war and the loss of their son, and they followed through and they built this beautiful castle, and I think it's a tribute to that family, and I think the other Drews would be thrilled about it. And to build on what Tom said earlier, I think what's really elegant about the Castle Drogo is Lutyens used an extraordinarily limited vocabulary: solid stone, wood, tiny bits of wrought iron, and virtually nothing else but geometry. I mean, almost everything else he develops just using that very limited palette, and yet it's a place of comfort, austerity, but comfort, and beautiful, and beautifully handled, beautifully detailed with a very limited palette. Hand of a master.
Thank you both for that. We have one question here from Thomas Krisman. What are the specific medieval precedents that Lutyens may have looked at regarding Drogo?
Ankie, do you know specific ones?
I do not. I have seen literature referring to some, and I'm embarrassed to say I do not know. Be interesting to find out.
It's if you look at places like Durham Cathedral, I know it's a stretch, but that's a building which is massive like this. It is a building where a lot of the detail is actually carved from the mass of the columns and other parts of the building. So whether it's a specific example or not, the thinking is almost medieval in how Lutyens handles this building.
I do know that Lutyens was interested in making the castle his own, and although it would have attributes that were like a medieval castle, he specifically did not want to copy any of them because he was building in the modern era. And Lutyens written famously about the super thought needed to really get to the heart of the matter to create a very pure kind of architecture in any style. And I think that Drogo is his super thought distillery of medieval components of castles, but rather than never really copying anyone.
Just one thing to add, one of the things we noticed when we were there and we talked about with the men and women who worked in the building, that in a lot of ways it's a modern, has an almost proto-deco aspect, which are the bands of windows. It has these very long horizontal bands of windows, which are antithetical to what really would happen in a castle, where things were vertical and narrow. If you look at it, people have a chance to go back and look at this or look at the pictures of it, you'll see lots of bands of windows. So he manages to pull that off and not lose the medieval character of the building.
I think sadly we're pretty much out of time. There was a question about why did you decide to compare Biltmore and Drogo, but maybe all the themes that we've covered help kind of explain something that has a lot of contrast. So would you like to wrap it up, Robin?
Yes, thank you all for coming, and we'll try to check any questions that didn't come up on this chat. We'll try to answer by email or something. But thank you so much. Have a good day, and thanks for attending.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.